Hi, Carrie.
Hi, Josh.
I had to wait a few seconds.
I know.
Because
We had to
YouTube
have
cut it
silence.
off.
I know.
I apologize for everybody that watched and didn't experience the Hi, Carrie moment from last episode.
I know.
Because YouTube cut it off.
Mm-hmm.
But I did say it.
You did. You greeted me. Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how I feel about you being all the way over there. People who can't see us, because we got 4 cameras right now, so we don't have it on all of us, but you're like way over there.
I know, because we have 4 people. We've never had 4 people before.
They're like our children right now.
They're in the inside.
Yeah.
We're on the
We'll
edges.
show you guys them here in just a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right, but again, we have to keep our banter to a minimum when we have guests so we can get going.
Yes.
So, but we have a really special episode, kind of hot buttony a little bit, you know. And so we are going to be talking about the mental health and relational health of first responders. So don't go anywhere. Sorry, I'm laughing at Rebel.
Sorry, I don't follow the rules.
Yeah, she never does. She's like whispering to Derek, thinking like that mic's not going to hear her.
No one will hear it.
That mic
It's just
is
a
way,
microphone.
that mic is way closer than Derek.
It is way close.
Okay. Well,
Oh,
anyways.
goodness.
All right. Well, we appreciate everybody tuning in for Therapist Take, and just to cover a few housekeeping things for a minute. It's just the things you hear every time we start an episode or you hear anything on YouTube or a podcast. It's just smash that subscribe button, like our stuff, share it with everybody or whatever, you know. So if you're not watching this on YouTube, head over to YouTube, subscribe to our channel. It does help the algorithms, and that's what we're really trying to please there, the algorithms. And but this will also be dropping on the audio platforms at some point. So if you're listening to this on the audio platform, please give us a 5-star review. And if you're willing to go the extra mile, you can even write something sweet and kind about Carrie.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Josh.
You're welcome.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So anyways, so now that we've taken care of all that, we are going to be talking about first responders. We're going to talk about their families. We're going to talk about their traumas and just some unique challenges that first responders have in our culture. And we have some really special guests with us today. We have Derek Thomason with us, who is a licensed professional counselor, and he works for the police department in the wellness unit as a licensed professional counselor there. And we also have Rebel Buersmeyer, who has been on the show before. Because we always talk about Rebel's the most trained person in our office.
Yep.
So we'll have her talk about EMDR or eating disorders, I think is what we had her talk about last time. But she also works pretty regularly with first responders, particularly, if I'm getting this correct, families who have had families of fallen officers, basically, or family members or people who know fallen officers are close to them. So you guys are basically in the emotional trenches with the first responders. So I thought you guys would be great to have on the show today. So thanks for coming.
Happy to be here.
Yeah.
Are you, Rebel? Are you happy?
I'm so excited.
We know Derek was, because when we did our Instagram Live, he just sat right in front of the camera and he was the only one on it. Yeah.
Well, moving's harder than it used to be, so I just stayed put.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Moving does get harder, especially when you're stationary all day long for years, right?
Yes.
Yeah, as therapists. So, yeah, we
And
have.
I don't know if the audience can see that I'm wearing a boot, so.
Not cowboy boot.
Yeah, a broken
yeah.
toe boot. So.
Yeah, there we go.
Well, you can
Slows
stick
me
your
down
foot
a
up
little
into the camera if you want.
It's not that urgent.
Are you self-conscious about it?
I think they can picture it.
Okay.
Yeah, they've had one probably.
Yeah.
You know,
The
everybody's
first thing I
seen
thought
one.
was cowboy boots. I was
I
like,
know.
why- you just wearing one cowboy boot
One cowboy boot.
That would make it hard to move
and one
too.
shoe?
Yes, stationary would be good with
Like,
one
I
cowboy
understand, like, if you got your Nikes mixed up in the morning, but
Sure.
you got a boot and a shoe on.
boot. Yeah.
That's
What
pretty
kind of
bad.
morning did you have?
You might want to.
We all have those days.
Yeah.
Right?
we do.
If it gets that bad, you gotta
Yeah.
do something about that.
Yeah.
Wellness check time. For
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so to start out with, this is kind of a hot button type issue in the sense of, I don't know if you people who might have read the description of this episode, I started out, you and I talked about this a little bit, Derek, in the beginning of that, saying, first responders, are they heroes in your view? Are they villains? And it seems like there are two camps that are constantly feuding on social media or in even mainstream media about this. And the objective today is, as we tend to do as therapists, is to take a deeper look and to kind of show a different perspective, which are basically the human beings behind the badge. And that's not to suggest that there's not such thing as bad policing or or to excuse bad policing, but I do think that it seems like to me that and I could be wrong because I don't know the stats, but your bad cops, your bad officers, or whatever are really the minority. The vast majority of people are really just trying to do their job and do it well. I have family members that are police officers and stuff, and the same with them is that they just want to do their job well. And they also have a unique set of challenges to that. And so it's kind of a, kind of one of those issues. It's kind of like, do we really want to talk about this today? Can we stay with something safe, like, marital problems?
Sure.
No controversy.
Infidelity. Let's go back to betrayal trauma.
Yeah,
Let's do that.
Yeah.
That seems a little safer. So to start out with, you guys tell us a little bit, Rebel, we'll start with you. Just tell us a little bit on kind of what your experience is in working with first responders.
Sure. So I started working with first responders in 2015. My friend Stephanie got me involved with an organization called Concerns of Police Survivors. So my first experience was going to a kids' grief camp for a week in Wisconsin and providing group therapy and therapy for children of their parents had died in the line of duty. So since then, I continue to work with Concerns of Police Survivors, going to several of the different retreats where we provide services, EMDR therapy, presentations for different things for different family members. We also do co-workers. And then here in the practice, I see quite a few first responders or family members of first responders.
Yeah. And just to make a point about that too, for anybody watching this, there are already, in this live broadcast, there are already resources listed in the show notes or in the description of the video. But we are going to add even more of those when this is done, because there's a lot more. I mean, we're going to, pick our favorites in a way, in a sense, or the ones we're more familiar with. And so make sure you check those out, because there are a lot of resources for things like that. So, And so what about you, Derek?
So I worked in private practice for a long time and saw several first responders in that setting, actually in this office building. So I got connected a little bit through that, and then January of 2023, I started full-time with the police department. As their licensed counselor, I work with the wellness unit there that is specifically dedicated to the health and wellness overall of the officers, their families, and professional staff that works for the department. So been doing that for a little over a year. In that time, I've had lots of training through a group called Warriors Rest Foundation that helps understand a little bit deeper the lives of first responders and how to work with that. I've gotten to do a couple of the Concerns of Police Survivors retreats as well, and work through giving some of those presentations and doing therapy there and things like that. In addition to post-critical incident seminars that they put on through Warriors Rest Foundation. That's a 3-day seminar that gives first responders an opportunity to debrief with some of their peers and then learn a lot of resources engage in some individual therapy, EMDR, things like that. So over the last year, almost year and a half, I've had lots of opportunity to work with this population. So.
All right. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys for being here. Let me just real quickly, before we dive too much further into it, just kind of go over the structure for everybody so they know kind of where we're headed with this conversation. And so, and of course it can go any way we want it to, but so if we want to, you know, digress, or I don't know why we call it digressing. Like right now I'm digressing, but I really don't think that's what I'm doing. But okay. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to kind of start off and talking about just the unique mental health challenges, move into of first responders, and then move into the unique relational challenges of first responders. And then Carrie and I are kind of just pick your guys' brain a little bit about just from your work with first responders on just things that you have learned or become aware of by being in the trenches with them that people just might not know about, you know.
Yeah.
And then we might revisit some of those resources you guys mentioned at the end.
Yeah. Well, I also just want to kind of ask you guys, as we talk about this, first responders, you both have mentioned working with law enforcement, but first responders isn't just law enforcement,
Absolutely.
right? I've had paramedic clients, I've had ER doctor clients, trauma surgeon clients, right? I mean, there's dispatch, absolutely, right. And so
Firefighters.
yes, firefighters, right. So I think it's just important that we make sure that we're using that broad term for a reason, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I'm glad y'all for that point of clarification. Rebel and Derek primarily work with police officers. That's why we kind of referenced it that way. But yes, that's a broad range. And you guys are kind of like first responders for first responders in a way, right?
Yes. Mental health clinicians often are, right? Well, we're going to talk
yeah.
about that, like secondary trauma and those kind of things,
Sure.
right?
Right.
Yeah. So when you guys hear, what surprised you guys about, like when you, yeah, see, I'm violating my rule here. I'm diving into the third point. Let's stick with the first one. Yeah, I was going to go right to that third one. Let's talk about these unique mental health challenges, because I think that is something worth noting. And I think it's different based, I'm assuming it's going to be different based upon what group you're working with. So like if it's firefighters versus police department, you know, you're going to experience some differences. But what are you guys seeing as, or, you know, the unique mental health challenges that first responders face?
I mean, I think one of the main things that people don't necessarily think about is as soon as any first responder really puts on their uniform, they are on duty and they are in that persona, whether it is firefighter or paramedic or dispatch or police officer. And once that happens, they go into a state of hypervigilance. They're having to watch out for everything that's going on around them, anything that might come up. And you just don't think about how that triggers the stress hormones and the fight or flight. And it's a constant thing for anywhere from a 10 to 12 or firefighter and paramedic 24-hour shift, where they very rarely get to let that down. And our bodies just aren't built for that level of hypervigilance on a consistent basis. And so I think that's one of the unique challenges that that most people probably don't think about.
And it doesn't stop until that uniform comes off.
Yeah.
You know, and then on the flip side, when that uniform comes off, oftentimes you'll see them go from this hypervigilance to this hypo, and they're just kind of numb and kind of checked out a little bit.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's a lot of times what family members get to see at home.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's just because it's going to the hypo, you know, that's still a defense response. That's still not a trauma response, but a survivor brain response.
Absolutely,
Fight,
yeah.
flight, or freeze.
Well, and just the brain and body dumping those chemicals.
Yeah, so depleted,
You go from high level of those hormones that are keeping you pumping, and you know, you're best dressed, you're on the ball, you're sharp, you're witty, you're funny, you're in the right headspace, and then you just have nothing left when you take that off and go home. And so, yeah, a lot of families experience an officer or a first responder that's isolated, that's depressed or just checked out,
Lethargic,
lethargic.
yeah.
They just want to sit in their chair and flip through the TV channels and see what's
Yeah.
on and
Right.
not have to make any decisions. You know, what's for dinner? I don't care. That's
Right.
going to be your most common response to stuff like that,
Right.
because
Right.
they've been making constant choices all day long and
Just to stay alive.
just to stay alive, just to take
Yeah.
care of the people they take care of
Sure.
and be on the ball with everything. So,
Right.
yeah.
So when I'm working with first responders, particularly police officers, they one thing I talk to them about is like, you know, it's not you said like putting the uniform on, you know, and then you know when the uniform goes on, then the defenses go up, you know, type thing. You got to survive, but I don't think it's as simple as flipping a switch when they come home. It's like, oh no, I just get to be human. And I think that's kind of what you were reflecting on Rebel with
Right.
that the hypervigilance changes, but it still doesn't mean they're not on guard in a sense.
Right, right.
You know, and so it does pose unique challenges because one thing we talk about a lot with particularly in the betrayal trauma realm is how our clients will go into compartmentalization mode, you know, but with first responders, they have to
They're
compartmentalize
trained
every
to
day.
compartmentalize, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's embedded
Absolutely.
in it, right?
Yeah. I mean, you can't be out on, I always use like war metaphors. So like, for like military, you know, if I'm, you know, a sniper on a rooftop, I can't be thinking about who that person is across from me, nor can I be thinking about my family back at home that I really miss and love.
Right.
You know, I just have to be here and think good guy, bad guy. I got to do my job,
Right.
you know? And so,
Yeah, well, and you do see this become kind of the first responder lifestyle. I mean, when they're out to dinner, they won't sit with their back to the door because they've got to be able to see whatever
Yeah.
happens. They're cynical about anybody who's offering something nice or kind. It's like, what's that about? What's your
Right.
angle kind
Right.
of thing. You know, just
Right.
becoming skeptical of everybody because, especially for law enforcement, but I think all first responders, it's like, what does this person want from me? Because
Sure.
nobody just comes up to you out of the goodness of their hearts most of the time. So you just get used to not trusting the people around you, and your circle gets very small.
Yes.
So that's all that you invest
Yes.
yourself in.
I just got home from a retreat for coworkers for couples, and one of the presentations that I led was about negative beliefs and
Yeah.
those negative core beliefs, and that was what was all encompassing of I'm not able to trust others.
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's so autonomic that it's especially when you've served for several years,
Right.
there isn't an ability to say, I'm out to dinner and I don't have to worry about the exits and
Right.
I don't have to have a getaway plan. No, it's already there. You know, your brain does it like breathing at this point.
Right.
But just because it's autonomic doesn't mean there's not a cost.
Right.
Right. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of times the first people that recognize that are the family members of
Sure.
the first
Absolutely.
responder.
Sure. Well, and historically, our first responder training has done a good job of getting them into this hypervigilance and being suspicious and paranoid and watching for everything, but has not done a great job of teaching them how to turn that off, how to take care of themselves in other places. And so that's a trend we're trying to change. That's part of why my job exists, is to help with training at the recruit level and all the way through to retirement to help decompress and be able to come
Right.
back to that normal zone of vigilance
Yes.
a little more quickly, a little more efficiently,
Sure.
with various resources and things. So
Yeah.
That's probably when I see couples, first responder couples, that's probably the main thing that we focus on, at least in the beginning, is being intentional about coming home and decompressing and then being present for your family.
yeah,
And it's a major
Yes.
intentionality
It
for
is.
them.
And especially if you haven't done it, if you've worked for a long time, it is work. It is a new hill to climb to
Yes.
learn how to go from that, right?
Yep.
And I also just I always think when I'm sitting there with clients that do this type of work, what that has been like for their bodies, because it's like slamming on the gas and then slamming on the brake to your endocrine system over and over and over, right?
absolutely.
And I always just wonder about what toll that must take.
Yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah. You're really good, Carrie, about bringing it back to the body, which is one of the books that Derek recommended, which we have recommended many times.
Sure.
The body keeps the score, but
Yeah.
I think it's really important to reiterate that, because your body, every individual cell has its own memory bank, and that's there for survival.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah.
Well, and a lot of our first responders will have that body response, but not connect it to the mental or the trauma or anything,
Right.
because again, they've been trained to kind of disconnect from that, and so they're having back problems, or they're having headaches, or they're having whatever else, and it's just, that's just part of it.
Right.
You just take a ibuprofen and move on,
You
and
bet.
just do your job.
Yeah,
Yep.
well, when our vagal nerve is controlling everything, and that's a lot of where this is. A lot of what this is impacting is that vagal nerve. I mean, it can create IBS and gut issues. And
Can you explain just briefly what the vagal nerve is?
so, sure. So we have, I think, 10 cranial nerves in our body, and the vagal nerve is the longest of those nerves. And the vagal nerve controls pretty much everything, respiratory, digestion.
And it runs the length of our torso.
Yes, yes.
From the base of our
Yes.
back
And
up
so when our vagal nerve is in a safety response, if you will, we're able to digest correctly. We're able to sleep. We're able to, just to function in a safe and stable way.
Yeah.
And when that vagal nerve is activated in that fight or flight, our body is trying to conserve energy because it's getting ready to fight or flight.
Right.
And so our body stops digesting, and we take shorter breaths, and
vision changes.
vision changes.
Heart rate increase.
Yeah. And so it's impacting everything in the
Adrenaline flood,
body.
and the muscles are ready to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned sleep, because I can't count the number of officers that come in and tell me they average 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night on a good night, and that's just normal, and they're okay with it, and they don't see the problem, and they have learned to function on it.
Sure.
But
Right.
outside of their job,
Right.
they're not functioning as well. And
Right.
that 4 or 5 hours is not doing as much as it needs to do, and
Right.
not giving them that space for their body and their brain to really do the healing that it needs to do, and processing and all of that.
Because
So,
when you sleep, your body is digesting.
Yeah.
Your body is
Right.
cleaning out the old cells
Absolutely.
that are done, right? The sweeping, I always think
Right.
of it as sweeping out, right? And it doesn't have that chance when you don't rest and actually sleep, especially in REM cycles.
Right.
So again, the pile up of what starts
Yeah.
happening that we all write off with, I'll take an ibuprofen, or, I just need to ignore it.
Right.
And trauma is something that happens
Yeah.
to the body, right?
Yeah.
And the body doesn't forget, like you're
Yeah.
mentioning there, Josh. And so you can't ignore the pile up, right?
Right. And talking about the body, I was talking to a woman at the last retreat who, I can't remember exactly what she does, but she does something with trauma and hair. And so she was testing, she can test people's hair and kind of see what's going on with them. And she can tell through that, she can go back and say, oh, you experienced trauma,
Holy cow.
10 years ago. So it's even,
That's
that trauma is even held in the cells of,
Jeez.
the hair. So it's
really
held in
cool.
every cell.
It's really neat. Yeah. So, like when your body is being stimulated, through your alarm system's getting activated, like it does with first responders, and I would kind of think that probably firemen or anybody working for the fire department would probably would really understand this, because this is what I was told too. So if anybody watching this or has accurate information, I want to say this with a grain of salt, because I'm trying to go back into my memory banks right now and recall here. But if I remember correctly, I want to say like the life expectancy is somewhere around mid-50s or something, mid to late 50s. And what I was told is that a lot of that has to do on the fire department is because of that alarm bell going off so often, and they're being jarred out of sleep in such an abrupt way that it is really hard on their system, and creates so basically, their stress
and
system
it's
is
significantly impacting their hearts and putting strain on their hearts.
Right.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they get to sleep at the fire station, but they don't really do deep levels of sleep because
Right.
they
Yeah,
have to be on guard for an alarm at any given moment. And a lot of stations are set up so that even if it's not your team that's getting called out, you still hear the alarm and respond to it, and then have to figure out, oh, that's not my team. Some of the newer ones are doing it by color or making it zone specific or something, so that you don't have to get that. But still, I mean, that light sleep that you have to be in just to be ready to go as soon as something goes off. It's not real sleep.
Physicians, those long shifts, medical residents and nurses working overnight. And I mean, those things where even if you're sleeping, it's not sleep.
Right.
It's not in your bed in the dark, cold, quiet room.
Right.
Yeah.
Where you're safe.
Right.
Yeah.
And the body knows that.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's one thing I want to go back to that you said earlier, Derek, related to trust, and I think this will be a good segue into the unique relational challenges. But when you said, you kind of just said it just in conversation, spending their time not trusting people. But I want to just kind of be specific with that we're not talking about, like them walking around looking at somebody else and saying, I don't trust you. Like it's more like, just, it's kind of like as therapists, like what's the thing that you can't do as a therapist that you have to let your spouse do or somebody else do because you've just seen or heard too many stories. Yeah. One thing I say a lot is that in our job, that all the things that never happen in this world happen every day in our job. Right. Absolutely. And so like, for example, like when it comes to hiring babysitters, I have to let my wife do it. Like because I can't tell you how many people I've sat across from that, and grown men at that too, that have had, because we often think of abusive babysitters, I guess, this is why we don't let men babysit kids or boys babysit kids, because we have this fear that, they won't be nurturing enough, won't be paying attention. That one might be true, but also too, just we don't want them to get hurt in other ways. And I can't tell you how many men I've worked with that have had female babysitters abuse them, and they're 50, 60 years old, and they're, finally, their body's finally releasing all the stress. And so I just have to let my wife take care of that because, and that's something I know about myself. And so I think when we're talking about trust with first responders, it's kind of like in that same vein that they've seen the darkness this world has to offer in ways that most of us don't. And in some ways, I kind of feel like that we're not supposed to. Like that's part of their job is so we don't have to. Right. We get to sleep. We get to sleep at night. We get 8 hours of sleep. Because we don't have to think about these things, and so it's part of their sacrifice. So I just wanted to be clear on that. That's kind of what you were saying.
Yeah,
right?
and I mean, I've had that same experience with a lot of officers. They won't let their kids be with babysitters unless it's super close family, and they won't let them spend the night at friends' houses unless they're super close with their parents. And even then, it's like, it's really hard. Letting them outside of my range of control is hard, and so I'm going to keep them in here, and that's all I trust is what I can see, what I can hold, what I can control, kind of thing.
And even their social groups are pretty small for the most part.
Yeah, they tend to become very first responder centric.
Yeah, all the firefighters hang out with firefighters. Hang out with other
officers and their families, and the firefighters with their families, and things like that.
They get it.
So it becomes a very small world that's just and then it's all shop talk and things like that when they're hanging out. It's not decompressing.
Yeah.
And going back to, I think I'm getting off topic, but Josh, going back to kind of that early death, I see a lot of this too because of that small circle that they create. That is what they know. And so, their job becomes their identity. Absolutely. And when they retire, there is nothing. Yeah. And so that's something else that I concentrate a lot on with my clients is creating an identity outside of just the job.
Right. Yeah. And I think that the families are a part of that as well, right? Because like you're saying, their circles are small or their opportunities are small.
Right.
Like I've even, looked at working with first responders through the developmental psychology lens and watching at those different stages of life what that conflict looks like, right?
Yeah.
Because when your kids finally reach adolescence and they want more autonomy, that is going to kick up a new level of fear.
Yeah.
Right.
If you're already living in a world where it's my job to keep everyone safe,
Right.
and I know all the bad things that are out there,
Absolutely.
right? And so
Right.
just even like, adding what, kind of to what you're saying, this lens to it, like as all life inevitably changes, right? Now you've got a small circle. Now you shop talk. So now even your social time is really staying in the trauma and the stress of it. And then the natural life pressures of change are put up against it. It just feels like this buildup,
Yeah.
right, over time, as more years of service and more exposure to traumatic events happens to the first responder, but then also their families and their
Right.
partners.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the reasons we've started talking about retirement at the training center with recruits, because we want them to think about,
That's
you know,
great.
this career is not forever. Your family hopefully is, the rest of your identity hopefully is. So maintaining those other friendships, maintaining those outside hobbies, if you're a fisherman, if you're a hunter, if you're a runner, if you're a whatever, stay in those things, keep connected with that world, because eventually this career will stop at some point, whether
Yes.
retirement or you quit or whatever,
Right.
Right.
it's going to stop. And,
Sure.
and it definitely has an impact on the families. That's one of the reasons the post-critical incident seminars that I mentioned, those include spouses. And for some first responders, that's the first time they hear how their job has impacted their spouse.
Really?
Oh,
They
that's
get, they
hard.
get to do that
Wow.
debrief process as well,
Oh, yeah.
and share the intensity that brings to them.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it's an eye-opening experience,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
helps
And
get that
crucial.
process going in a better direction, because
Sure.
then they understand each other.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that just for a minute. Like, what's it like for the spouse? As we always think about, like, the officer that puts on his badge every morning and his gun and walks out the door and goes to basically a war zone, especially the local PD. Not to say that others don't do things like that, but patrols and domestic violence calls and it's all kind of these little miniature war zones. What's it like for the spouse or the partner that watches them leave every morning?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely one of the tough parts of the job, is the spouse has to think about what may happen, and it could be any number of things. And a simple traffic stop can turn into a critical incident with a shooting or with something else that happens. And so they're constantly on their guard about that. And then when critical incidents do happen, our officers have a tendency to keep it to themselves, because I don't want to burden my wife with that. I don't want to burden my kids. But they see the news, they hear the stories, they know something's gone on. And so that lack of information really is as traumatic and damaging as just knowing the facts of things. Because you know how our brains work, we go worst case scenario. And so with our family members, if they don't tell me the story, I'm going to think, oh,
Right.
this is all the things that happened.
Right.
And that may be true, but it may not be.
Right.
So it's just as traumatic.
Yeah, well, and I've heard too many times, from spouses of fallen officers, not in the Oklahoma City area, but around the U.S., that they learned of their spouse's death through social media or
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
TV.
Oh
Yeah.
my!
And so
Yeah, that's awful.
it's
Yeah.
so the spouses
Yeah.
are learning a lot of information,
Right.
not from their officer or their first responder, but
Right.
from
Right. So a lot of work that you're doing, Rebel, are so the typical spouse or partner of an officer, has to do a lot of the same things, right? That the cop or the firefighter or whoever it may be that leaves the house, and they're putting on their coat of armor, just so they can come home, right? Give themselves
Right.
the best chance to come home. But the spouse is kind of doing that
I
too,
agree.
to some way, right?
Absolutely.
Like they're having
Mirror.
right.
Mm-hmm.
They have their own compartmentalization process,
yeah.
and so they can get through the day,
Right.
without focusing on what could happen. But then you are working with people that have experienced the thing that they dreaded the most,
Right.
Right, the thing that they feared could happen happened to them.
Yeah.
And tell us, there's got to be a shift there or something, on what happens to them emotionally. I know there's obviously grief and shock and things like that, but
There is. I mean, there's obviously a lot of grief, a lot of shock, a lot of trauma, and what I've seen with them is, yes, the loss is traumatic in and of itself. How they lost their first responder is traumatic, but also, the media, being all over the media with the funeral, with the memorials, the constant memorials that they have every single year tends to be traumatizing for them. So many of the spouses that I've worked with tend to check out, obviously, which unfortunately has a huge influence on the kids, especially. It seems like so many of them have young kids.
Yeah.
And when these kids are that young, losing one parent to death and then losing the other parent to checking out, unfortunately, that whole dynamic definitely shifts.
For sure.
Yeah.
It's a different life for
That's
those
so
kiddos.
tough. Yeah. So, but let's kind of bring it down to the couple relationship and just talk about that just for a minute, because when I'm working with first responders and their partners, what I talk to them about is that I'll tell them like that you do have a set of challenges that a lot of people won't have to deal with. So communication, one thing I say is vulnerability is the lifeblood of a healthy relationship, and that is not, in my opinion, that does not change because of what you do for a living or what you've gone through in life. Sure. That's still the reality, and what I tell them is like it usually will be more difficult for you, but it is doable. It is, and not in like an exhausting way. Like you can figure out your own method, your own rhythm, to create that vulnerability in your relationship. But I will say that I think it does pose some unique challenges, especially until they find that rhythm for them. So, yeah, you guys seeing that too?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we always tell our officers, you really want to have like a specific conversation with your partner about, what version of the story do you need to hear from me? Do you want the G-rated version or the R-rated version or somewhere in between? They don't need all the graphic details, but you do have to get vulnerable about some of what you've been through so that they know, and again, are not jumping to worst case scenarios in their head and things like that. And unfortunately, vulnerability is especially a challenge for first responders, because again, that trust and then their instinct to protect, I don't want to put that on somebody else.
Absolutely.
And so I don't want to be vulnerable because that makes her vulnerable or him vulnerable in addition. So that's a tough hurdle.
I think that partners, whether it's explicit or just something that they've rolled with, they also don't ask too many questions. Right? Because that's not what we've done, right? And maybe at the beginning of relationships that works, but over time, it's just like any wear and tear, right? You've got to change some things when you've experienced it a few times. And so, your partner having to go and experience these really difficult situations and not talk about it is probably not going to last. If both of them and the relationship want to have mental health. Right.
Or some ask a lot of questions and
then
their
the other
first
side,
responder partner isn't willing to open up and gets frustrated with the questioning and tired of the questioning, and that causes a different
conflict.
kind of rift.
I always encourage my couples to, it may not be, I'm going to tell you everything about what happened, but let's talk about, and of course this is vulnerable as well, but let's talk about, your experience with it. How are you feeling? How are you impacted? And kind of keeping that line of communication open as well.
No.
I know they do not.
Noticing, right? It's a softer way.
Right.
I think for people that are listening to this too, like that, I just think it's important for them, especially partners of first responders, that it's recognized that it's a unique set of challenges that they have that most people probably don't understand in that way, and what they have to go through every day. And it does behoove us to muster up some compassion, for that. And some of those relationships aren't going to work. There's not going to be able to figure it out, and that gets to be okay too, because this is part of the sacrifice that I think doesn't get talked about very much, because I think every first responder makes this sacrifice. Like, every first responder or most first responders have a potential of losing their life, putting their life on the line. But this is a sacrifice that's not, you can't see it, you can't touch it. It doesn't get talked about very much, or at least from my experience, I don't see it being talked about very much. And it's one that every single one of them will make to some degree, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think we say thank you for your service directly to first responders, but to say it to their families as well, because, again, their systems go through that same, hijacking when their partner leaves the house, or when they come home from that, or when they get called out in the middle of the birthday party, or whatever the situation is, right? I mean, you can't go through those things and be the same.
Right.
And there's no way to know that journey when you start a relationship, as a first responder. But it does change, and I think one of the reasons we're highlighting it is because if you can have that awareness, then you can do the things that you guys are talking about, which is how do we talk about this in a way that's going to work for us, and even what works in year 1 may be different than in year 5 and different in year 10. But the goal is, we want to, and we commit to putting some energy around this relationship, and actually what protects the marriage is different than what you think protects yourself at work. Right. That's a whole different brain system.
Well, and it definitely is an ongoing conversation, because relationships change and grow over time. The career changes and grows over time. So it's got to be consistent, and awareness and intentionality are two of the things that we push nonstop. Just awareness and intentionality. If you're not aware, that's problem number one. But then once you get aware, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to make something different?
When I talk about kind of the ripples effects of trauma through the family system, that is the first thing that I have them remember and to evaluate is kind of their self and that self-awareness, and because how can we communicate it, right? And change the family dynamics if we don't even know what's going on with us.
Exactly.
So that's, with both the spouse and the first responder, it's
So let me ask you this. Let's move into this, talking about this third point. Like, what is there? When you started working with this population, was there anything that surprised you, like that? It's just information that you might not have until you kind of get into the trenches with them, like that. I know it's a question kind of on the spot that no one prepared for, but.
I know.
No one prepared to answer.
Let me go back a few years to what I didn't know.
But like for example, I'm going to talk about cops particularly because that's who I've seen more of any first responder group. That's who I've seen the most. And there's that cop, kind of, I'm not saying they're all jacked, but they try to take care of their bodies, or at least most of them do, or a lot of them do. Maybe they shave their arms. I don't know, but and sometimes maybe they're perceived as being kind of a hard ass or something, and they get into my office, and they're just the most caring, nicest people, and they will even admit, some of them will even admit that when they're patrolling or whatever, that they are a hard ass, or they might be, they're not too concerned about, making friends, while they're patrolling, and then they get into the office, they start, and you can see like they care so much about the public and what they're doing, and I don't know that I'm like, that maybe that's a side that people don't get to see as much, and maybe they won't ever, because of how they do vulnerability. But so that's just an example of something. But I'm not in it like you guys are in it. So.
Well, I mean, I think we do tend to miss the human side, because they have to put on that persona for their job, for sure, and it becomes that hardened exterior. And and we do forget that most of these first responders get into the job because they care so much, because they want to serve, they want to help the community. It's not just a paycheck. If it was, there's a lot of other things that people can do for just a paycheck. And some of them come from very lucrative jobs and choose first responder to take a pay cut because the job has a purpose to it for them. And so, you know, trying to remember that human side is underneath that hard exterior can definitely be tough, because that's often all you see from the guy that pulls you over for a speeding ticket, or the guy that's dealing with the gang person or the druggie or whatever.
Or the
And
crowd
so,
control, yeah.
And I think, kind of going off of that, it's important to remember that most of these first responders obviously have experienced a lot of trauma, right? And that a lot of them are hard on us because of what they have seen.
Absolutely.
And what they want to prevent from happening. I think that it's important for us to remember that these first responders are seeing things that nobody should ever see.
Right.
And at a volume that nobody is prepared to see. It's not just once in a while. It's consistent.
Right.
And you know, here's another example too. I've had many friends, as probably most of us have, that friends, family members work in law enforcement, and I have known a couple people that have been in police-involved shootings, you know, and I was talking to this one guy that was on a pretty big, high-profile case in Oklahoma, and it was had an officer-involved shooting, and he was one of the officers that was involved in the shooting. And it was actually, he was on some kind of special tactical force thing. I'm sorry, I'm butchering the lingo there, or the title. But I just got curious. He was a therapist, asked questions. You know, I'm just like, what do they do? Like, what's that like? And he said, well, they take your gun, you know. And then you basically you have to, you know, they put you on some kind of leave of some sort, and you just kind of basically wait, and they're going to let you know if they're going to charge you with something. Yeah. And I'm like, what? I'm like, and it's just, and I think he was, because of the nature of his particular job in law enforcement, that it was like his second or third. So like 2 or 3 times, and it's like he's just got to wait and see if he's going to be charged with a crime, and not a misdemeanor either. You know, it's not, you know, like got mad at you and flicked your ear in a movie theater type thing. You know, like you know, and he just talked about it like just so calmly, and it's like it's just, and I think that's part of that compartmentalization. You know, and it just kind of took me aback, because I do think, like, I don't want to discount that there are people that have bad experiences with law enforcement. You know, it's like I had a really bad experience with dentists 20 years ago. I still don't trust dentists very well, you know, and I think that's fair for me, you know, and I think, you know, when you have a bad experience with law enforcement, it usually isn't good at all. You know, it's much worse than the dentist. And so I think it's okay for people to have their own personal views in that sense. And I think it's fair to also say that there's no perfect system that we have, whether it be policing, or, you know, how the fire department works, or how therapy works, or whatever, you know, and everything could use some improvement. But I would encourage people, like, to go get to know some of them.
Absolutely.
You know, like, go talk to them. You know, go, like, I mean, you can you know, kind of vilify people based on, like, what Derek Chauvin did, you know, but most law enforcement aren't him, you know, and go talk to him and see the individual and the person that's behind that badge, and then make your judgment based upon your experience with that particular first responder. That's kind of how I see it, you know.
Yeah, and kind of going off of that, I think maybe not a surprising thing, but I think a good reminder at least. You know, our first responders experience people in their worst moments.
Right.
That's their constant, that's their consistency, and so they don't expect that person to just be coming up to say, "Hey, thank you for your service," or "Hey, we really appreciate you," or anything like that. And so just, you know, understanding that there's a reason that they're hardened against the people that might come up to them. It's because they're coming up to complain about something that half the time is either stupid or it's something they actually have to get involved in for a legal thing or whatever. And so, so you kind of have to give them a chance to find that humanity underneath that because they're just not used to people being interested in that side of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I'll tell you a really cool story about, like, I had when I lived at a different house that I live in now, one night my dogs were barking like crazy, and I just didn't even think anything of it, and went out the next morning, and they were barking because somebody was breaking into my pickup, and they couldn't get into the cab of my truck, but they got under the hood, and I don't know why, but they stole my battery, and they clipped out the cords, and there was this big mess in my truck. But I decided to go ahead and make a police report because I figured that they probably want to know that so they get accurate stats for the community, right? And so the cop came out and did it all and everything. And after he took my report, he gave me his personal cell phone number and said, "Hey man, I work on cars. When I get off duty, I'll come help you fix this if you want me to." And I didn't call him, but I was like, that was pretty dang cool of him, and cops that are willing to do that type of thing, or like everybody sees like these YouTube videos or something where cops might be misbehaving, but there are so many of them when they're out there playing basketball with the inner city kids, and they're trying to become some, to not, when people see them, they don't see something to be feared, and we really need to be highlighting them more. Because just like anything, the negative, it takes, Carrie, 1 negative to out, 10 positives to outdo a negative
20.
or something like that.
It's John Gottman's research. 20 positives to get back to neutral after 1 negative.
Right. Yeah.
Well, and that's one of the big problems too. I mean, media hones in on the bad. They're going to show the negative interactions. They're going to show the bad cops. They're not going to take video and do a story very often about, hey, here's this good police officer or this good firefighter or paramedic just doing their job because that's what they're supposed to do. They want the bad story to get people to click and to like and to watch and all that kind of stuff. So you have to remember that those are the exceptions. They just look like the rule because that's what gets magnified out there.
And they do need to be reported on. We just but I think it'd be nice to see some good stuff, and there's plenty of it.
Absolutely.
And so.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the resources again. So let's start with the books you guys mentioned, and we'll have Hannah put those the graphic on the screen. But Derek, you I mean, The Body Keeps the Score. I mean, that's kind of like the trauma Bible.
Yeah.
Right.
You're right. And so we've recommended that so many times on this podcast. But tell us about this other one that you mentioned.
Yeah. So the other one is Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement. It's written by Dr. Kevin Gilmartin, who is actually a former police officer who then got his PhD and wrote this book based on not just his experience, but research. Cool. And it's just a good, easy read to understand that hypervigilance, hypovigilance roller coaster, how first responders in general go up and down. He focuses on law enforcement, but it's pertinent to any first responder. I read it and thought, man, this is about a counselor's life. Because when I go to work, I'm up, I'm on, and then when I get done, I'm drained,
you want to be
and
in your
empty
chair.
and done, and I just want to zone out. It's also good for spouses to understand what their first responder spouse goes through, or partners, or really anybody in the community that just wants to have a better understanding of what that lifestyle really looks like and some of the impact that has on our first responders. And he shows through research, it takes, without intention, it takes 18 to 24 hours to come back from that hyper to hypovigilance dump.
Right.
And most first responders don't have 18 to 24 hours between shifts.
They don't. Right.
So they're going straight back into it before they've even recovered back into a normal
back
zone.
to neutral.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's what our officers and our first responders experience. That's what their families experience. And there's ways with intention, which he talks about in the book, of getting through that more efficiently, more effectively. But you've got to really have some good mental and emotional health and wellness resources that you tap into.
Yeah,
So,
that's good. Thanks.
Yeah.
And Rebel, you had a couple too, and I'm sorry that I didn't get yours in time to put the graphic on the screen. But
My fault.
Yeah, we'll definitely link them in the description. They're just not in there right now. So.
Yeah. So I have a couple that are good for family members of first responders. The first one, I Love a Cop. Great book by Ellen Kirschman. But the other two, A Marriage in Progress and A Chip on My Shoulder, both of those are written by a woman named Vicki Newman. Vicki, if you're watching this, I'm sorry I haven't read them yet. But I know Vicki very well, and I know she has a passion for relationships and marriages.
Right. Does she have a website too?
She does. So she started a organization called How to Live Our Cops. So it's kind of based in California, but we have representatives all over the U.S. We do have a representative here in Oklahoma. And so this is a great organization for spouses to get involved in.
That's great.
Great.
Good.
Great. Were there any other resources you guys want to mention that we haven't mentioned yet? Because we'll make sure to link. I'll try to make sure to go back and when I watch this and grab those and put them in the description.
Sure. Well, Derek mentioned Warriors Rest. I'll let you kind of talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Warriors Rest Foundation is a great organization. It's a nonprofit based out of Edmond. They do a lot of training, especially in the state, but really around the country for first responder departments to develop peer teams. So they have support people on the job who understand the job, who then know how to have individual and group interactions to help with whatever critical incidents they go through. They also put on those post-critical incident seminars that are great for any first responder. And again, that's police, fire, paramedic, dispatch, and their spouse. And it's a great opportunity to, again, debrief with other first responders that have been through similar incidents, and then learn a lot of resources and get connected with things that maybe they didn't know existed and didn't know how to handle some of that that they've been through, and gives them a first dose of individual counseling if they haven't already been in counseling, and potentially a EMDR experience, because they always have EMDR clinicians at those. And so it's just a great resource for first responders and their families and departments to develop their teams and things like that. So they're doing a lot of good stuff out there.
Yeah. Also, the COPS organization, Concerns of Police Survivors. So I've talked a little bit about that in terms of working with survivors of fallen officers, but they do have several different trainings that are for law enforcement and also families of law enforcement. They put on traumas of law enforcement training, kind of going throughout different states. I think they were in Oklahoma in February, but I'm sure they'll be in Oklahoma again. And then they also put on a national conference every year. That is great, again, for law enforcement and also the spouse of a law enforcement officer.
I didn't realize they did so much. Like I just thought they did the cops camp that you go to so often. But when you sent me the website, I was kind of perusing through it, and I'm like, wow, they do a lot of stuff.
They do
That's
a
really
lot.
neat.
It's a great organization.
And Derek, I'm glad you mentioned the EMDR. We're not going to get too heavily into that because I think we're probably going to be talking about that in some upcoming episodes. But we've also done YouTube videos and stuff on that, so I'll make sure to link those and I'll add those into the description so people understand what we're talking about with EMDR. But I've also put in the description or in the show notes, if you're listening to this, a link to a therapist directory for EMDR therapists that you can find them in your area. And just kind of put it in perspective, when I was attending a first responder training, there was a guy that was talking that was kind of higher up in the world of the fire department world in Oklahoma City, and he said that if he will not send his first responders to a therapist that doesn't do EMDR. And now, as a therapist, I do think there are multiple modes of dealing with the trauma of first responders, but it does speak volumes to the confidence that they have in EMDR. So, I thought it did anyways.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And my wellness team is the same way. They look for EMDR first, because first responders are so good at compartmentalizing, and EMDR is so good at breaking down those compartments and connecting things together and even the mind-body connection that EMDR brings is just it's something that so many people can benefit from, and especially our first responders that are good at putting those in separate boxes and not making those connections. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, guys, I think this is the longest episode so far. We're right at an hour, and it's only supposed to be 30 minutes. We get longer and longer every time, but it's been such a great discussion, and I know that there's probably a lot more that we can talk about, especially in terms of like how do you go about treating them, and that'd be something to have you back on sometime to talk about, you know, effective modes of treatment and kind of dive into that a little bit more. Yeah. But and you know, as we say to first responders a lot, that we're grateful for their service, but we're grateful for your guys' service, because I couldn't do what you guys do. You know, like there's just no way I could see you know, on a regular basis. Like I think I'd have to work on some compartmentalization skills. To Derek, on your end, figure out how you're going to work with people that you got to send them back out into the war zone after therapy. And then Rebel, you're working with people constantly who are dealing with the grief and loss of the tragedy that nobody wants to have happen, you know. And so we appreciate you guys for having the stomach for that. So yeah. And Carrie, I'm always grateful for you. Always.
Thanks, Josh.
Never am I like ungrateful to be in your presence.
Right back at you, unless you're putting me on Instagram Live.
Unless
it was a stroke and a kick, right?
Yeah. It's kind of like a backhanded compliment or something, kind of like that.
I appreciate you accept.
I'll take it though. Still, I'm a middle kid. Like I'll turn anything into a compliment.
You'll take any scrap you can get.
I will. I'll do it.
Well, I gave you a scrap there, Josh.
Yeah. Rebel, you don't have to be mad at me.
And this is what I do. I listen to it and I'm like, what are they talking about? I am
you're
so
the baby.
lost.
That's because you're the baby of the...
Yeah.
Derek probably understands that's the baby of the family. He's like, what are these big people talking about? I'm just kind of, hey, guys.
Whatever. It's inconsequential.
I'm just grateful.
Because you're an only. Rebel's basically an only, and you're a baby.
That's true.
Yeah. And so.
Got everything represented here.
Yeah, you're the oldest, and I'm the middle.
Yep.
And Hannah, what are you over there?
Oh, another middle kid.
Why haven't we connected on a deeper level? She said she's middle, for people who didn't hear that. But do you have ADHD? You do? So, and you remembered we talked about it? Oh. Yeah.
Good long term.
You have good long term? I have bad long term. Good short term. No, I don't have any term.
Do you remember?
I have a lot of squirrel moments, that's for sure. Okay, well, we're going to let you guys go, and thank you, everybody who tuned in to watch and support it. Remember, subscribe to the channel. Give us a good review on the audio platform, so this will drop on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and all, and wherever you get your podcasts. That's how people say it on the podcast. So give us a good review there. So we'll hopefully see you guys. Rebel, I think you're going to be here subbing in for me next week.
Next week, yep.
Okay.
There you go.
What are you guys going to talk about? You decided
We're
yet?
going to leave you hanging with that, Josh.
Ooh, a teaser.
Yeah.
Yeah, that means they don't know, guys. All right. We'll sign off now.